What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as Hamhawks42 on the internet, and it is upon us, Dominaria United spoiler season. It's here. It has been a couple of months since we've had new cards enter standard, so I don't know about you, but I'm ready. I can't wait. So for this video, we are going to be talking through highlights that have been revealed so far. I'm not going to touch on every single card because they have just dumped a ton on us here in the first 2 days, but I would be remiss if I didn't build, or if we didn't do a video talking about some of these, because there are some phenomenal designs, and I gotta be honest, I'm excited. I think this set's gonna be really cool, and I'm gonna lead things off with a cycle of cards that I'm actually incredibly excited about in the Pain lands. That's right. So with every new standard set, we see nowadays, with every new standard set, we see a rare dual land cycle. It's pretty common for those to show up. I mean, in Capenna, we had tri-lands, as we did in Ikoria as well, but in any event, it's something that we come to expect. Mana fixing is really critical when you're building with more than 2 colors, and it's just really important, frankly. And this is a cool opportunity because the Pain lands themselves, like, for example, Sulphur Springs that we have up here in front of us, have always been themed around Dominaria as a plane. Certain cards in the cycle are named after locations on Dominaria specifically. Your Shivan Reefs and your Yavimaya Coasts. Those can only exist on Dominaria. And so now that we're going back to Dominaria, it makes a lot of sense for these to be coming back as well. And they fill a very important role that we're going to be losing in Standard. The pathways are going to be rotating out. The pathways from, Kaldheim is where they first showed up. Those were excellent, frankly. They helped us fix our mana beautifully. And, Zendikar is when they first showed up. Zendikar and Kaldheim had the pathways. But in any event, we're going to be losing them out of Standard. And so the Pain lands filled that role perfectly. These are lands that enter untapped. Always. You don't have to meet any kind of condition. You don't have to jump through any hoops. They just drop untapped. That alone, worth the price of admission. Frickin' love it. And they tap for colorless. But you could also tap them for 1 mana of one of 2 colors, depending on which land you're looking at. In the case of Sulphur Springs, it's black-red, and then they deal 1 damage to you when you do that. So later in the game, when you have multiple lands down and you can meet the colored requirements of your spells without these, you don't need to deal damage to yourself. But in that early game, if you're trying to play color-intensive 2 and 3 drops, your Sulphur Springs, your Yavimaya Coast, your Shivan Reefs, they are going to help you hit those on curve, and you take a little bit of damage, but to be honest, throughout the course of a game, that damage is somewhat negligible. We see that with other lands that deal damage to you as well, like the Shock lands and the Fetch lands, where in those older formats, like cracking a Fetch land, losing 1 life, and then grabbing a Shock land and putting it in untapped, I mean, you just burnt 3 life to get a dual land in play, and that's usually worth it. It just is. It's a very powerful play. That consistency in your mana base is critical, and the Pain lands have always been a cool way to do that. So I'm just over the moon that they're coming back, and they are positioned perfectly in Standard, so I think it's great. Also, I want to point out Sulphur Springs, the original artwork on Sulphur Springs has a demon just chilling in like this big hot spring, and there's actually an homage to it in the new art as well. So I love that. I think it's great. All right. So we're going to be going, like I said, we're going to be going through some other Dominaria cards. We're going to be talking about where they might show up, especially in Standard. I'm going to focus on Standard, but I will comment on like Historic and Explorer as we go. So the next card that I want to talk about is Defiler of Vigor. This thing is part of a cycle, and we've already seen a couple of the other versions. We saw the blue one as well, and they are not all created equal. I'll tell you right now, with Defiler of Vigor possibly, I wouldn't be surprised if this whole cycle, it looks like there's going to be 1 for every color. I wouldn't be surprised if Defiler of Vigor ends up being the best one. It is a 6/6 trampling Phyrexian worm for 3 green. Now 6/6 trampler for 5, we've seen 6/6 for 5 before. Elder Gargaroth or Auspicious Sterix come to mind. Okay, the stat line is good, no question, but it's not like bananas ridiculous like it would have been at one time in Magic's history. But there's more. Defiler of Vigor also says, as an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 green less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of green mana you pay. So it effectively gives all green permanents in your hand, or, exiled in ways that you'll be able to play, Phyrexian mana. It effectively gives, but not indefinite Phyrexian mana. It does, if I'm not mistaken, this will only affect it once, I could be wrong on that. That's actually something I need to look up. But I believe it'll only affect 1 mana pip on that card. Because it says you may pay 2 life instead of, as an additional cost to cast a spell. It doesn't give you the opportunity of paying any amount of life and then reducing the green mana value based on increments of 2 of how many. I don't know, that was poorly worded. But in any event, as you cast a green spell, you may choose to reduce its mana cost by 1 green and lose 2 life instead. That's incredible. That's absolutely, I don't know what else to say. That's amazing. Because all of a sudden your green creatures are going to be dropping. Because that's really, that's what this is going to be doing. It's going to be getting green creatures on the field. Like your green permanents, like green aggro is kind of a, it's been a thing for with good reason. And there's that. And then there's even more. Whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, I want to point out, this is going to affect the Defiler of Vigor. So Defiler of Vigor itself is going to get an additional +1/+1 counter. But it does not affect the creature that you just cast, because that creature has not entered the battlefield yet. It is still on the stack when that trigger hits. So you're going to get the +1/+1 counter on whatever creatures you already have, and then your creature is going to enter the field. That's important. Obviously, when you're playing in Arena or MTGO, it'll take care of that for you. But when you're in paper, just know you don't cast a creature, it doesn't enter the battlefield, then you get this trigger. No, you get the trigger first, and then it enters the battlefield. Just keep that in mind. But I think this card's insane. Like, point blank, absolutely insane. Bananas crazy. I was of the impression that mono green aggro was going to stop being a thing post-rotation, because so many key pieces of that deck are rotating out. We're losing Werewolf Pack Leader, we're losing Old Growth Troll, we're losing Blizzard Brawl, we're losing Inscription of Abundance. There are cards like Master's Rebuke, there are cards like Uvenwald Oddity that are still here that maybe see some play. Oh, Asika's Chariot's not going anywhere. Asika's Chariot is going somewhere. That's going bye-bye. And then there's also, like, I don't know, there are some pieces remaining, but the core of that deck that has made it such a powerhouse for the last couple of years, frankly, is going away. So I was expecting mono green to take a huge hit. However, this guy leads me to believe that maybe that deck is going to shift from a really low to the ground aggro deck and possibly shift into more of a mid-rangey style deck, maybe with some ramp elements, because if this thing is able to stick and you have some kind of card draw engine, all of a sudden you're getting your stuff out for cheaper, your entire team is potentially getting massive. I mean, if you cast 2 green creatures after this is on the field, whatever board you have all of a sudden gets 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature. The Defiler itself, could potentially be swinging as an 8/8 on turn 6, or if you're ramping with some other things, potentially turn 5 or even 4. I mean, I suspect this card is going to see some play. Like, this is amazing. It does so many things. And I think this is one of those we're probably not all going to be sick of it, because it is a 5-drop, so you have to get up to 5. But that's very possible in the current what I anticipate will be a fight rigging meta. I think Defiler of Vigor is absolutely going to see play. I'm probably going to put it in that deck right away, actually, because that's bonkers. But anyway, this card is great. Keep an eye out. It's definitely going to be a thing. All right, next up, we have Territorial Maro. Now, I'm going to be talking about some of these cards for various reasons. I want to put some of them like the worm on your radar because they're awesome. This one, not so much. Territorial Maro is a star for 4 and a green elemental. This does not have trample or any kind of evasion, doesn't even have reach. But it does have Domain, which is an old ability that they are bringing back for this set. I'm intrigued by Domain, but I have a feeling it is going to be underwhelming because it just is almost every time it is available. In the case of Territorial Maro, Domain says its power and toughness are each equal to twice the number of basic land types among lands you control. So if you have a Triome down, for example, that is 3 land types, Territorial Maro will be a 6/6. If you then have a land that's, if you have all 5 land types represented in your mana base, which again you could do with as simply as 2 Triomes, you can accomplish that. This would be a 10/10. So okay, I mean, we're at a point where a vanilla 10/10 for 5 is not that great, which is saying something, because there was a time in Magic's history where if you put a 10/10 on board for 5 mana, you were doing the thing and you were running away with it. But modern Magic is well past that, and I just don't think this card is going to be viable. Because to be honest, to stand up against some of the modern stuff that we're seeing, this needed to have that domain ability, have trample, vigilance, reach, and then also do something cool when it hit your opponent. Like ramp you, like go search for a land when it enters the battlefield or something, like, or when it hits your opponent. Like, it just needed to do more, and it just doesn't, which is unfortunate. I mean, you could combine it with like cards like Kodama of the West Tree or something, or East Tree. Anyway, the one Kodama from the newest Kamigawa block, like, you know, if you had a way to modify it, I don't know. There are ways to make this okay, but I don't think it's ever going to be great. In limited, it could be decent because it could be a decent size, but I think the domain is going to be really tricky to pull off. Also, a very important detail that I want to point out with the pain lands that I was talking about at the top, Sulfur, Spring, Java, Maya Coast, and whatnot, they do not have basic land types. So your dual lands that are coming in this set do not help you with domain. So that's a bit of... That's a bummer, you know. That's a feel bad for sure. But in any event, I don't think this card is that great. But domain is an interesting mechanic, and depending on what they do with it, we might see some cool stuff. Anyway, next up, Lightning Strike. This card is very simple. It is very simple. It is very effective. Instant, 1 and a red, deal 3 damage to any target. When this card is available, it sees play. It's that simple. This is Lightning Bolt at home. They took Lightning Bolt, the classic, amazing magic card, 3 damage to any target for 1, simply made it cost 2, and it's still awesome. I don't know what else to say. This card is going to see a ton of play. It could make a burn deck viable with cards like Thermo Alchemist. It also has an opportunity to, well, just be a good removal. Like, right now, it can go alongside Strangle, and basically, in a mono red or like a Boros or Gruul aggro situation, any creature with toughness 3 or less is just not going to stick around to block. That's fantastic. And being able to hit this at instant speed, awesome stuff. So this is a reprint, but it's a great one. I would be remiss if I didn't touch on it. Lightning Strike. We're doing it. Yeah, good card. Good card. Next up, Squee, Dubious Monarch. Squee is a character that I absolutely adore. Squee is a goblin that was I believe, the cabin boy on the Weatherlight, and he was part of the Weatherlight crew. And at one point, he was actually captured, I believe, by, I am so sorry that I'm blanking on his name. It wasn't Yawgmoth. It was... Feel free to leave it in the comments below how ridiculous I'm being here. But he was... anyway, he was captured by the forces of Wrath. And... As I'm embarrassed that I can't think of that dude's name, but anyway, it doesn't matter. He was captured, and he was actually given immortality. I believe, as I recall the story being that he was given immortality so that he could be tortured to death and reborn repeatedly, which is really dark and kind of twisted when you think about it, which really paints just how evil those characters were back in the day. But as a result, Squee escaped, and now he doesn't die. So Squee is everywhere. He's just in every Dominaria set. He's immortal. He will never die, period. He's just always here. Or when he dies, he comes back. I'm not sure the exact mechanics. In any event, we see that here as well. So Squee Dubious Monarch is 2 and a red for a 2/2 haster. Whenever it attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. Cool. It's kind of like a Den of the Bugbear on a creature, which is solid. So it attacks for 3 power the turn it drops, which is potentially turn 3 on 2 separate bodies. Cool. As far as like goblin style strategies, go wide mono red situations, it does the thing. It does exactly what you want. And then, as I mentioned, Squee's immortal. Also has the ability you may cast Squee Dubious Monarch from your graveyard by paying 3 and a red and exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard rather than paying its mana cost. So late in the game, once your graveyard is full, if your opponent has successfully swept the board or dealt with your attackers in one way or another, you can then escape Squee from your graveyard back into the battlefield. Gives you a little bit of reach in the late game to chip in for that last damage that you need to close the game out. And because that, Goblin Generation is on attack, what you're doing is the first turn you're swinging for 3, the next turn you're swinging is for 4, the turn after that you're swinging for 5 if Squee survives. Now, Squee himself is only a 2/2 each time it attacks, so chances are your opponent is going to be able to gum up the board, and on top of that, Squee is a must-answer target, because if left unchecked, the amount of damage is going to grow throughout the course of the game. So I like this card. I think that it's actually a really cool design. It doesn't look like much on its face, but I think in aggressive decks, we are going to see it. I think we're going to see this card, and I think it's going to be roughing us up in the near future. So I like it. I think it's good design. All right. Ooh, speaking of good design, this next card that we are looking at is Archangel of Wrath. Yes, it's all about Wrath. 2 white. So immediately you might be thinking, oh, is this like some kind of weird board wipe situation? No, unfortunately, but it's because Wrath is in the name and its mana value is that of Wrath of God. But it's a 3/4 flying lifelink angel. For 4, that alone is kind of worth the price of admission. Like, it's not bad on its face. Lifelink's a big deal, but it also has Kicker Black and or Kicker Red. Now, this is an ability that we saw in an earlier card that was previewed. It was the red board wipe that was pretty lackluster. This is an example of that design space used correctly for a very playable card. When Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals 2 damage to any target. Then, when Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked twice, it deals 2 damage to any target. So you can deal a total of 4 damage. Because the Archangel of Wrath is the source dealing the damage, you are getting the life link as well. So you're gaining life, dealing damage, picking off potentially problematic creatures such as Squee or your Bloodtithe Harvesters, your Fable of the Mirror Breakers. Those cards are all getting picked off by this, and you're gaining life, and you have a 3/4 flying lifelink body at the end of it. This card is great. So if you can stick it on 4, even in a white heavy situation, awesome. If you're playing with Mardu or any combination of colors, if you're in Boros or Orzhov, this is playable. Even being able to kick it once and getting the 1 shock for, and then this creature for 5 is still pretty good. Like, you can do a lot worse than that. But if you're in Mardu and you could potentially cast this for 6 and get 4 damage, 4 life, in addition to the body, this card's great. I think it's going to see a lot of play. It's a cool design. I dig it. And I'm probably going to be running it in a number of different decks because it can stabilize the board in one go. This is the kind of card that is phenomenal if you are behind against an aggro deck. If you're behind against aggro, this card is exactly what you want because it's going to pick off pesky attackers. It's going to gain you a bunch of life, make it much harder for and give you a good blocker on board, make it much harder to get through. So it might be a sideboard card in best of 3, but in best of 1, I can see the main deck. Like, if there's a main deck like Mardu mid-range deck, this is in. This card is absolutely in it. All right, next up. This card is weird. This is the Phasing of Zhalfir. This is a saga for 2 blue that has a new mechanic called Read Ahead. When you read ahead, you are literally taking the saga, the story that is unfolding in front of you, and you are skipping some chapters to get to the end of it. The way Read Ahead works, you choose what chapter you start with, but the skipped chapters have no effect. So with Phasing of Zhalfir, chapters 1 and 2 are the same, and with a lot of the Read Ahead sagas that we've seen, that has been the case. In the case of Phasing of Zhalfir, phase 1 and 2, another target non-land permanent phases out. It can't phase in for as long as you control the Phasing of Zhalfir. So you kind of like Oblivion Ring, borrowed time something temporarily. You get it off the field. You can get rid of your own thing as well. That's an option. You can tuck it away to keep it safe for later. That's there may be benefits to doing that. It is worth noting when something phases out, it retains any enchantments or counters that it has. So keep that in mind. But it's decent, like being able to remove something off the board. If you're in an aggressive situation, being able to get a key blocker or a key piece of your opponent's combo off the board for a couple turns might be exactly what you need. This can do that. But when it gets to chapter 3, destroy all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller creates a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. This is very similar to effects like Beast Within or Pongify that get rid of, or Swansong, where like you eliminate one threat, but you give your opponent a threat to, as well. So when you're looking at board wipes, one situation that you want to be aware of that board wipes are theoretically designed to deal with is when your opponent is going wide and being very aggressive. A good example of this is Scoot Swarm. It is going to be rotating out of standard, but we've all seen those boards where your opponent has 75 freaking Scoot Swarm tokens, and they're going to be swinging with them next turn, and if you don't have one thing that can deal with all of them, you're just dead. And that's where Meathook Massacre, classics like Wrath of God come into play, and that's where those really shine. You get to eliminate all those things. Phasing of Zhalfir doesn't address that problem at all. It takes a huge board of 1/1s and turns them all into 2/2s. It literally makes that problem worse. So that's a thing. It is really nice in that if your opponent has 2 or 3 really big creatures, it downgrades them dramatically. So that's nice. So I wouldn't consider this card a board wipe. This is a removal spell. Like, you need to treat this like a Kenrith's Transformation or a Beast Within kind of situation. Like, if you wouldn't be willing to use those cards in this kind of situation to get rid of a threat, this isn't going to fit. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. You also need to be very much aware of what's on your side of the board. That's going to be critical here because when you hit that third chapter, your stuff goes too. Frankly, I don't think this card is that great. It doesn't really give you the flexibility that you need to really be successful in answering certain threats in control. Like, you don't have the flexibility to target anything. It just sort of happens, and you're left with whatever the result is. So I think the design is cool. I think Commander is going to, this is going to see play in Commander. I don't think it's going to see any meaningful play in Standard. Unless there is a crazy combo deck that can deal with, like, instant speed removal that struggles with sagas. I can't imagine what that would be. I mean, I'll be shocked. I will be straight up shocked if this sees meaningful play in Standard. But it's a cool design. I like the card. But yeah, like I said, I think this is a janky build around. It's not a quality answer, Next up, now we're getting to the good stuff. So there were a number of cards spoiled here in the first 2 days, specifically in black, that are insane, and we are going to be getting into them here. First up, the Raven Man. This is a 2/1 human wizard for 1 in a black. It's also legendary, so Commander Brewers, here you go. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. Now, if the creatures could block, this card would be absolutely bonkers. So the fact that those birds have some kind of downside, I think is smart. Like, that's a good thing. But that ability, I want to point out, it triggers every single turn. If a player discarded a card for any reason, whether you did or your opponents did, this triggers. You can simply cycle a card or channel a card on your opponent's turn and you will get a bird. It also has the ability, pay 3 black, tap, each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. So having a card on the field that you can sink mana into to disrupt your opponent's hand is freaking awesome on its face. Now, you do have to have a lot of mana lying around. And so in late games, if you're both in top deck mode, you're not really going to be able to take advantage of that very, very often, I would imagine. But from time to time, absolutely. And if you're going up against a control player, I think this is going to be a nightmare for control players. They're going to have removal for it, and like, this is a must kill on the spot. Because if you and your opponent are in top deck mode, they top deck a counter spell, they're going to pass the turn. Before you cast whatever spells you want to cast for the turn, you activate Raven Man. It's an activated ability. There's nothing they can do about it. They have to discard that counter spell, and then at the end of the turn, you get a bird in addition to doing whatever else you were going to do that turn. Freaking cool. It's just, I think this card is shockingly powerful. We're going to see this a lot. So yeah, instant speed ways to force your opponents to discard stuff. In older formats, we have cards like Waste Not, Tiny Bones, Turgrid. I mean, you could already be running Hand Disruption in some of those older formats. This guy just slots right into those decks and gives you just a ton of reach, because with every single turn, you're creating those birds that can then be attacking. So you're turning the discard into power on the board. Freaking dope. I love this card. And all that power on board has flying too. I mean, I think Raven Man is fantastic. And Raven Man combos beautifully with the next card we're going to be talking about, which is a card that modern players everywhere know and either love or hate. And that is Liliana of the Veil. She's back, everybody. And in one of the most potent, one of the most powerful incarnations of Liliana ever is going to be dropping into Standard. And for the record, I believe that Standard's in a place to handle it. I don't think this card is going to be absolutely insane, but it's going to be really freaking good. Imagine Raven Man on 2, Liliana on 3, uptick, each player discards a card. That's simple. You discard a card, you discard something you want in your graveyard anyway, maybe something with like an escape or flashback, or a reanimator target, which is what I'm going to be doing with her. And then your opponents have to discard a card, you hit on their hand, you create the bird at the end step. Like, it's incredible. And this is on 2 and 3. It's just like, this isn't crazy late game stuff. Like, this is a curve out you are going to see. You will see this. But Liliana has a couple other abilities as well. -2, target player sacrifices a creature. So if your opponent only has 1 or 2 creatures, that's devastating. And then -6. If you hit this -6, like, I mean, I'm a little hesitant to say the game is over, but let's be honest, the game's pretty much over. Separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. So you could do something as simple as separate all their lands and all their non-lands into 2 separate piles. And it's like, well, do you want to have all the action and stuff you have? Or do you want to have the ability to play any more spells for the rest of this game? Like, pick one. That's all you got. And if you want to be a real jerk, if they're playing like a ramp situation, you split the lands in half, and so you half their mana base no matter what they pick. And then you put like their best thing on one side and a bunch of little dorks on the other. Like, you can do all kinds of mean stuff with that, and it puts you into kind of a weird, like, it's the most like savage fact or fiction style effect ever, and I love it. So this is going to be brutal. I think we're going to see a lot of Liliana hitting on 3, upticking to the moon, and then like racing for that -6. And this is where cards like Lightning Strike is going to be very important. Being able to pick off loyalty counters off Lily, even if you're not able to kill her, just to get away from that ultimate is going to be very important. So keep that in mind. Yeah, this card's great. I don't know what else to say. It's a reprint. It's incredibly powerful. It is, you know, it's a money card for good reason. And we're going to see her in Standard. I'm excited. I think it's going to be really fun. All right, next up. The cavalcade of weird black things continue. We have Braids, Arisen Nightmare. This is a 3/3 for 1 black. The legendary creature Nightmare. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So in a deck that has a lot of different card types present, you can be very selective about what you sacrifice to put pressure on your opponent. If they have 1 or 2 really good artifacts, being able to sacrifice an artifact of some kind, whether it's an artifact land in older formats, or like an Ichor Wellspring, or one of these like little artifacts that like enters and draws a card that you don't care about, or even tokens like blood tokens or treasure tokens, being able to sacrifice those, put pressure on your opponent, and worst case scenario, you draw a card and they lose 2 life. Like, that's not a bad situation to be in. And also, in situations where you can recur lands out of your graveyard, there's actually another card that's going to be entering Standard that we're going to be talking about later that does allow you to recur lands out of your graveyard each turn. So I think that combined with Braids is going to be very, very potent. But even in older formats with like Ramunap, Excavator, or Crucible of Worlds that allow you to just straight up play cards out of your graveyard, Braids, every turn you can just sacrifice a land, assuming that, you know, you have the lands you need to keep moving. You sacrifice a land. You can even tap that land for mana first. Well, no, never mind. This is an end step trigger. Just kidding. But you can sacrifice the land, and then all your opponents have the opportunity to either sacrifice a land or give you cards. And in Commander, this is going to be a situation where you're just going to be drawing 3 cards on your end step a lot. Like, that's going to happen a lot with this card because this is a 3-drop, and it triggers the first turn she enters. So this is savage. I think this card is going to be absolutely mean, and I'm definitely going to build around it. Now, I don't know that it's going to see competitive play. We're going to need some kind of like Jund-style attrition deck for this to really be powerful, but we have tools that can really lean on that. I mean, Liliana, obviously. We also have Obnixilis, the Obnixilis, the adversary, which kind of fits into that role too. So there might be something here. There might be a deck that can lean into putting pressure on your opponent's resources in order to give you resources. I mean, all the other cards like Invoke Despair as well fits into that kind of style too, if you're able to cast it. So I think this is like, yeah, Braids is awesome. I love this card, and it's a really cool character from Dominaria's history coming back. I dig it. I don't know what else to say. I dig it. All right. Next up, speaking of really badass lady characters, Sheoldred the Apocalypse. I love this card. When I found out Sheoldred was coming back, I was over the moon. I think Sheoldred is an awesome, like, the Praetors in general, I'm all for. This whole Phyrexian arc that we've been going through is freaking dope, and Sheoldred's no exception. 4/5 Death-Touching Phyrexian Praetor for 2 black. 4/5 Death Toucher for 4, already worth the price of admission. Now, it is worth noting, in older formats, she does die to Fatal Push. That's a big deal. Keep that in mind. If your opponent sacks a treasure token for a Fatal Push, triggers the Revolt, she's gone. That is very important. So that's a thing. Also, she can be targeted with Skyclave Apparition, which thank goodness is rotating out of Standard, because that would be this card's downfall in a lot of situations. But Sheoldred the Apocalypse, 4/5 Death Toucher. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Very simple, very effective. And whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. In situations where you can wheel the board, where you can have everyone discard cards and then draw 7 fresh ones with cards like Emergency Power or good old Wheel of Fortune, this is insane. So, like, this is a commander card that is going to be absolutely savage. Like, if you know, like, if your opponent sits down with the Sheoldred the Apocalypse in their command zone, strap in. You're going to be in for a lot of drain. Your opponent's going to be doming you for a whole lot of damage throughout the course of that game, because especially in Commander, because we all love drawing cards, right? It's one of those things that we're all about. Unfortunately, there's the card Secret Rendezvous. This says all players draw 3 cards. Other great cards are like Flump, whenever it's dealt damage, each player draws a card. Unfortunately, those are leaving standard because those could be super fun with this. You know, forcing everybody to draw cards. All of a sudden, you're gaining life. You're doming your opponent. If you have Quasar online, because you'd be an Esper theoretically, you could also be gaining additional life and draining them additionally with that. I mean, you could do some really cool things with this. I think Sheoldred the Apocalypse is a cool card. Again, it is a little on the slow side as far as standard is concerned. If you're going up against like the Boros aggro deck that we all know and love, or the like a mono red aggro situation, I don't know that she's going to get you there because it's a setup piece that requires you to hit a 4-drop followed by some kind of expensive payoff. So I don't think she's going to see a lot of play in competitive circles. But as far as like janky brew rounds go, which is kind of my jam, this card's great. I'm excited. I'm definitely gonna be running her. I like if I open a pack on Arena and I get this, I'm pretty stoked. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So I like Sheoldred. I'm glad she's here. All right. Speaking of Phyrexian stuff, the next card is the story beat that is kind of tugging at the heartstrings of Magic players everywhere, and that is Ajani Sleeper Agent. That's right, Ajani has been completed. Truly unfortunate. Wizards is definitely going down the list of like fan favorite, good-hearted characters that we all love and we want to see succeed, and just wrecking them with these completions. We saw it first with Tamiyo, now we're seeing it with Ajani, and on top of that, we know with the sets coming up, the war with Phyrexia is going to continue for a couple more sets, like 4. Like Brothers War, they made a comment in the live stream that made it sound like the Brothers War is not just going to be a throwback. There is going to be some new Phyrexian stuff involved in that. We also know that there's like War of the Machines and new Phyrexia that we're going back to next year. So this is not going to be the last Planeswalker character that we know and love that getting completed, so strap in. But Ajani Sleeper Agent, how's the card? That's the question. So 1 green, Phyrexian green-white hybrid, 1 and white. So you can cast Ajani for as little as 3 mana, as long as you have green-white available if you're willing to lose 2 life. And it does. He does have the keyword completed, much like Tamiyo before him, where you can choose to pay 2 life, to satisfy the Phyrexian mana. But if you pay the life, Ajani enters with 2 fewer loyalty. And in that case, if you were to pay the life, Ajani's starting loyalty is 2. Otherwise, Ajani's starting loyalty is 4. So, okay. And then the abilities. +1, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So if you see a card you like, frankly, if your deck is primarily creatures, so if you're in a Selesnya aggro deck, that +1 is great. You just look at the top. If it's a creature or planeswalker, you just reveal it and draw it. I mean, that's in certain decks, that's going to be +1 draw card a lot of the time. Planeswalkers with +1 draw card, I'm in. -3, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among up to 3 target creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn. That's, again, in a go-wide situation, that can be a kill shot. You can add a bunch of power to the board that maybe your opponent, and you can spread it around. So you can spread it out across 3 different creatures, gain them all vigilance, so you can attack for a lot of damage and even have blockers back if your opponent survives the turn. So that's actually a very powerful -3, again, in a creature-heavy deck. Then, Ajani has a -6. We are back to the age of Planeswalker Ultimates, and here we are. You get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature or Planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. That's right, we have an emblem that now grants poison counters. Now, if you're new to the game and you haven't played too much with Planeswalker emblems, you may be thinking, okay, but so how do I deal with that? And the answer is you don't. The moment the emblem hits the field, it is there for the rest of the game, period. End of discussion, it just is. And so if you have Ajani Sleeper Agent in a situation with, say, the worm that we were looking at earlier that gives all your green permanents Phyrexian mana, all of a sudden, you can be spending life to cast like 1-drop green creatures, and you're poisoning your opponent as you're doing it. That's incredibly powerful. The only thing that I can say about this card, well, I can say a lot about it, of course. There's a lot here. But thank goodness that this is entering standard at a point right as Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider, is rotating out. Because if Vorinclex was on the field, Ajani's starting loyalty would be 8, and that -6 would effectively read whenever you cast a creature planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 4 poison counters because of Vorinclex's passive. So this would be savage with that. That said, I am very disappointed that this Planeswalker is entering at a time when Finn the Fangbearer is rotating out. Because Finn is another card that is a green creature that bestows poison counters that cares about going wide with creatures. So a lot of cheap green creatures with Death Touch plus Ajani Sleeper Agent as like the curve topper could have made a very cool, very effective deck, because we've all seen Finn the Fangbearer go off, at least if you've been playing for the last year and a half or so. And those small Death Touch creatures hitting for 2 poison counters every single strike, usually what I've found with that deck is it ends up adding up about 6 poison counters, maybe even 8, to your opponent in the early game. Because you're getting them started as soon as turn 2. You know, you start with like a Tajiru Blightblade on 1. It's just a 1/1 Death Toucher for 1. Then you play Finn on 2. You attack the Blightblade. They get 2 poison counters. It's just right away. And then if you can attack uncontested on turn 3 with both of your Death Touchers, they get an additional 4. All of a sudden, right there on turn 3, they have 6 poison counters. The problem with that is if your opponent hits a Doomscar or hits a Depopulate, then you're starting from ground 0. Your Finn is off the table. Your poison counters now are irrelevant unless you hit another Finn. The Ajani Ultimate, however, would give you the reach that you need in the late game to bestow those last, to hit those last couple poison counters that you need to close out a game with poison. I think that's really cool. That gives that deck a potential late game that it didn't have before. So I'm hoping that some kind of like Selesnya Infect deck is going to be a thing in Explorer, but unfortunately we're not going to see it in Standard. Unless there are more cards in this set that give poison counters, which to be honest, I doubt there will be. They've been kind of shying away from that because of how much hate they got for, full-on Infect, especially with cards like Triumph of the Hordes. Like it's kind of bonkers when it fires. And so I don't think Wizards is going to lean too heavily on that, but as a Planeswalker alt, ultimates on Planeswalkers oftentimes just win the game on the spot. This doesn't quite do that, but it does put your opponent on a really cool clock. So anyway, I like it. I think the card is cool. It is a bummer to see Ajani fighting for the other team, but it is what it is. Here we are. All right, next up, this is a card I am incredibly excited for. This is Soul of Windgrace. 1 black, red, green for a 5/4 legendary cat avatar. Whenever Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield or attacks, you may put a land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. Right off the bat, in decks with cards like Evolving Wilds or in older formats, Fabled Passage, this is going to be awesome because you're able to ramp yourself immediately on turn 4, potentially turn 3, if you're also using cards like Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise, or Gilded Goose. If you have cheap mana dorks, or Llanowar Lone Speaker, which is another one that I believe Lone Speaker, that's the word, right? Anyway, there's a 2-drop mana dork in that has for mana of any color that I think would fit in this deck too. In any event, Soul of Windgrace is awesome. This card is really, really cool. It puts lands onto the battlefield right away, and it triggers every time it attacks as well. It does enter tapped, but you're getting recursive lands. You can also combine this with Braids that we were looking at earlier. You sacrifice a land with Braids, you force your opponent to either sacrifice lands or give you cards, and then Soul of Windgrace pulls that land from your graveyard back to the battlefield the next turn when it attacks. I think that's going to be really, really mean. I like this. This is a great way to recur those lands out of your graveyard. It also has a couple of other abilities on him. Green, discard a land card, you gain 3 life. Okay. Also, fun fact, if you have 5 mana available when you cast Soul of Windgrace and you have a land in your hand, which is possible in a deck that has just a ton of lands. Like ramp decks oftentimes have 28, 29, even 30 lands. Soul of Windgrace can really take advantage of that. One thing you can do, pay 4, Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield. When Soul of Windgrace's ETB trigger is on the stack, you can pay 1, activate this, discard a land card, gain 3 life, then that ability triggers, and then you can take the land from your graveyard and slap it on the battlefield tapped. So it can ramp, even if you don't already have a land in your graveyard, you can get one there with Soul of Windgrace, even the turn it enters. Sweet stuff. Anyway, it also has another ability. 1 and a red, discard a land card, draw a card. Sweet. We all love drawing cards, and that on a red ability I think is interesting, but all the same, great stuff. Then 2 and a black, discard a land card. Soul of Windgrace gains indestructible until end of turn and tap it. This gives like quasi regenerate, and I can't. So it protects itself if you have lands in your hand. It pulls lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield. So if you're activating it, you're then getting lands back. You know, so just by activating and taking advantage of these abilities, you can ramp. It's going to be drawing you cards. I think this card, and on top of that, I glossed over the fact it's a 5/4 for 4. So even on rate, you have a very strong creature. I think in Jund, I think there is going to be a Jund Land Matters deck in Standard that is going to use this. And you know how I know there's going to be a Jund Land Matters deck in Standard? Because I'm going to build it, doggone it. So even if I'm the only one playing, it's going to be out there. But I think this card is sweet. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It combines beautifully with cards like Braids, like I said. It combines with like Evolving Wilds, which isn't going anywhere. Like that card is going to be standard legal forever. Just because it's reprinted in like every set for limited. So I love this card. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's going to be able to do some really bonkers stuff. So, anyway, 10 out of 10. I can't wait. All right, next up. Here we have another weird janky brew that janky build around that I cannot wait to get my hands on. Zur, Eternal Schemer. This is a 1/4/4/3 flying human wizard. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. Those are 3 incredible abilities to be slapping on creatures. And this is all enchantment creatures. So if you have an enchantment creature already, like a spirit, you hit a Spirited Companion on 2, Zur Eternal Schemer on 3, already you have a 1/1 Death Touch, Lifelinking, Hexproofer just because you have your Spirited Companion down. It all of a sudden becomes like an amazing little blocker, and you can even be attacking with it. Like, I freaking love it. Anyway, there's more. There's more. One in a white. Target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and base toughness, each equal to its mana value. Now, those aren't enchantment creatures now. And so they do have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof as long as Zur is on the field. Zur is a must kill the moment it shows up because in decks that leverage it, it is going to get out of hand. So, enchantments like well, unfortunately, actually, a lot of the cards that I think of with this are like Omen of the Sea, Omen of the Sun, like the cards from Theros is really what like I really want to combine this with. But there is stuff in Standard as well that can take advantage of this. There are enchantments that can hit the field. This can pop off. It has some really cool potential. One card that I want to try working with this is Wiretapping, because Zur animates Wiretapping into a 5/5 Death Touch, Lifelinking, Hexproofer that's drawing you additional cards each turn. Like, I don't think Wiretapping is particularly good, but with Zur, it can become a beat stick that can end the game. I think that's neat. Like, again, I don't think it's good, but I think it's fun. And that's what I love. I love having fun with Magic. And yeah, Zur absolutely does that. So I think this card is cool. It's neat. It's a 1/4 flyer, which Zur, if you're familiar with, the old Zur, the Enchanter card that is like very popular in Commander. This card, it would slot into that Commander deck perfectly. Like, if you're familiar, one of the things I really like about these Dominaria cards that when they're taking older characters and kind of reimagining them, they are doing a great job of making them mechanically synergize with the older versions. And that's absolutely what we have here. I love this card. I think it's just freaking sweet. All right, next up, we have Jhoira, Ageless Innovator. This is a 2/3 human artificer for blue and a red. This is legendary, as most, instances of Jhoira have been, naturally. With the ability, tap, put 2 Ingenuity counters on Jhoira, Ageless Innovator. Then you may put an artifact card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of Ingenuity counters on Jhoira. So this card is actually really cool. For one, it is a 2/3 in Izzet for 2. That's already pretty decent, but what you're getting on top of that is as early as turn 3, you can tap this and drop a 2 mana or less artifact from your hand directly into play. So right now in Standard, we don't have a ton of great options for that. However, there are some out there. I mean, you could hit an Unlicensed Hearse, you can get a Reckoner Bankbuster, you could hit a Pithing Needle, especially if it's games 2 or 3, a best of 3. Like, those things are available. And on top of that, Reality Chip is another one that I think has some potential to work here. So I think Jhoira is going to be good regardless, because you get decent value. The most important part of that ability is you don't have to pay mana to activate it. So this is just tap Jhoira, do the thing. You can also do it at instant speed, which is pretty freaking cool. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So, however, the big thing is this card is going to depend on how good its support pieces are. If there are bomb artifacts in the format, it's going to be great. You're going to be able to get 2 mana worth of value for free on turn 3. You still have 3 mana to spend on whatever other spells you have, and then on turn 4 you can get an additional 4 mana of value by tapping Jhoira again, putting 2 additional ingenuity counters on it. Also, if you have any ways to like proliferate or double the number of counters you're putting on stuff, you can ramp up that way. I mean, this feels to me like an artifact themed Is It Mana Dork almost. But I mean, obviously there's some other interplay. To keep in mind, this does get shut down by effects like Solemnity, so that's something to be aware of, because it doesn't allow you to put the counters on, and then X would be 0 in this case. That said, you could still put like Tormod's Crypts and Ornithopters if you really wanted to directly onto the battlefield, but I don't know that would be particularly worthwhile. In any event, I think the card is cool. I think this card has a lot of great potential, and what I fully expect to see is this card is going to be a janky build around in a couple of decks early on, but I think Jhoira has the potential to step into a killer role with some artifact in the near future. I don't know that Dominaria United is going to have that piece, and we have a lot of great equipment from Zendikar that's going to be rotating out. Our Maul of the Skyclaves, even our Forsaken Monuments have been standard legal this whole time. They just haven't had support. There hasn't been artifact support to really, or colorless support in that case, to really make it work in standard. And Jhoira really is depending on that. But if you look at what happened in Kamigawa, that's where we got the Bank Buster. We got cards like Reality Heist, Reality Chip, Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh. Some of the pieces for a very powerful... Oh, Disruption Protocol is another great one, by the way. We have the pieces for a very powerful artifact-themed deck. We just don't quite have the artifacts to really take it over the edge and really make it pop. And I think Jhoira is another great support piece for that deck. And what I anticipate, I don't expect those artifacts to arrive in Dominaria United. I'll be very surprised. However, the next set is the Brothers' War. And if you're not familiar with the theme of the Brothers' War, it is the battle between Urza and Mishra, 2 of the greatest artificers the multiverse has ever known. If that set is not loaded to the brim with dope artifacts, I will be shocked. Like, from a flavor perspective, it is just begging to be full of artifacts. And we have another set coming out next year called March of the Machine. I mean, like, it has machine in the freaking name. Like, we're going to have artifacts soon that I believe. You know, again, we haven't seen any spoilers from these sets, but I'd be shocked if killer artifacts are not here. And some of the bones for a really powerful, Is It, or potentially even Jeskai artifact deck are here. We just need the artifacts themselves. And I think Jhoira is a killer piece to that puzzle that could help slot into that deck. Maybe as a 2-of that could be an incredibly powerful 2-drop to just take that deck to the moon. So I think this card is really cool. I don't know that it has a home right now, but this is a card I fully anticipate to be legal and standard for a month or 2 and not make any waves, and then all of a sudden it's going to be everywhere. So keep an eye out for this one. All right. Next up, we have Solkanar the Tainted. This is a very interesting card. This is a Grixis Elemental Demon, which is kind of a cool combination. You know, we've seen Elementals before. We've seen plenty of Demons before. Like, these are 2 creature types that are very common, and we're finally putting them together in kind of a cool way. So Solkanar the Tainted, 2 blue, black, red for a 5/5. So 5/5 for 5, sure. At the beginning of your end step, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Draw a card. Nice. Each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. Okay, fine. Solkanar the Tainted deals 3 damage to up to 1 other target creature or planeswalker. So you get to bolt something, or strangle something, really. Okay, cool. Exile Solkanar, then return it to the battlefield under an opponent's control. So if you've had Solkanar on your field for 4 turns, it's going to blink out, and one of your opponent is going to get it, which is a cool idea. I like the flavor of this because it gives you a lot of good value for each of those ticks while putting a 5/5 body on the board in 2 relevant creature types. So you can use it in a lot of cool ways, but you're gonna want to somehow do something with it before that last ability triggers, because if you just hand it to your opponent and they start drawing cards and start pinging you and killing your stuff, it's gonna feel pretty bad. Like, you don't want to let that happen. And this is going to be coming into standard right as Deadly Dispute and Village Rites are rotating out. So one of the obvious things to do is just sacrifice it before the last mode hits. That's one of the easiest ways to interact with this. So, but that's going to be difficult in standard. We don't have that many good sack outlets right now. There are some, like we have casualty spells and that kind of thing. So, all right. like dropping this to an Obnixilis and getting a 5 loyalty planeswalker, all right, you can do worse than that. But at the same time, it's not amazing. It's fine. However, blink effects, I think, is where this is really going to pop. So, a key rules detail. If Solkanar the Tainted is exiled and then returns to the battlefield under your control again through, say, a Planner Incision, or in older formats, a teleportation circle, because that's going to be leaving the format. But we have teleportation circle. We have Thassa Deep Dwelling. Blinking stuff is not uncommon. Like we've even seen cards like Ephemerate. I mean, white obviously does it a lot, but blue does it too. Blue has a number of effects that can do that. And so what you can do is you can keep Solkanar on the field, get your 3 turns of value. If Solkanar's still around, simply blink it, and you get to start over and get those 3 turns of value again. That is 6 turns before that final mode is threatening, before you have the need to give it to your opponent. And if you can't blink it again, then you're going to be fine. But let's be honest, 6 turns in a game of Standard, if after, like 6 turns after you have put a 5-drop on the field, the game is probably going to be over one way or another by then. So I think 1 Planner Incision is all you need to make Solkanar, to take Solkanar from being like pretty decent to being awesome. Because I mean that last mode is just never gonna fire, and that's sweet. That's exactly what you want. So I think this card is really cool. It's a good design. And actually another thing that I really dig about it is the Commander implications. In Commander, you can choose that last mode and hand it to somebody who needs some resources so they can help you like gear up and go after somebody. Like we've all seen that moment where one person has really wide board state and it's like, well, okay, I don't have a board wipe, or like, okay, I've used up my board wipes and we need to hit one, and somebody's like, well, I might, but I need to draw a little bit in order to hit that, then, or if you've already used the removal mode, you can make a deal with another player at the table, and on your turn you can hand Solkanar to that person. They can use the removal mode on their turn before the next, before the threat pops off or whatever. I don't know. There's cool play here that is just neat. So I think it's a really cool design. It's a neat Grixis. It's a neat Grixis commander, or well, potentially commander because it is legendary. But it's a neat Grixis creature. I like it in like a mid-rangey Grixis deck. I think this has a lot of potential. Also, it triggers at the end step. So you are going to get one of these modes the very first turn it comes into play. So unless your opponent has instant speed removal, you're at least going to draw a card when it enters. Sweet. Nothing wrong with that. All right, next up, we have Astor, Bearer of Blades. This is a 4/4 human warrior for 2 red white. Now, if you have been following any of my content, if you have watched my channel for any extended period of time, or you have even seen the background on my desktop or the background that I have when I do like commentary over at the pizza box, that kind of thing, I love Hammer. That is Colossus Hammer and good old Hammer time. The idea of taking a card that grants +10/+10 for 1 mana with this absurd equip cost. It has an equip cost of 10. So you need to somehow get around this equip cost, but if you can, you get a huge body really, really fast. I love that. I think it's a fun archetype. It does a lot of cool things, and I love trying to make it work in formats where it doesn't work. Astor, Bearer of Blades is a huge boon to folks like me who are trying to make that style of equipment work. And Astor, so it's a human warrior that says, when Astor enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal an equipment or vehicle card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Equipment you control have equip 1. Sweet. Vehicles you control have crew 1. Sweet. So again, in Commander, or in older formats, you have a situation where there are cards like Colossus Hammer that are cheap to get out but really expensive to equip. Astor gets around that perfectly by making them all equip for 1. There are also cards like Consulate Dreadnought, which is a 1-mana vehicle that it's massive. It's like a 12/17 or something. It's huge, but it has a crew cost of like 8 or something just absolutely absurd. So dumping 8 power into this thing to crew it is absolutely absurd. However, if it can crew for 1, all of a sudden you're in business. You can do some gnarly stuff with that. So that's great. So in a vehicle style deck that's leveraging high crew cost stuff, Astor helps you in finding the vehicle or the equipment, or equipment that has high equip cost. Astor helps you with both of those strategies beautifully. Now, I am a little bummed that this is going to be entering the format at a time when a lot of cool cards from Kaldheim that were trying to support vehicles and equipment are going to be rotating out. Armed and Armored and Reckless Crew were really cool cards that had potential in that style of deck. However, we didn't see enough good vehicles or equipments to really make them fire. They just didn't quite work. Because again, the payoffs, much like we were saying with Jhoira, the payoffs just weren't quite there to really make it sing. And I fear that Astor is going to fall into a similar situation. However, again, much like I was saying with Jhoira, this has a potential to be kind of a sleeper card. If the equipment and vehicles in Standard are not quite great, because we have some from Kamigawa that are decent, but nothing that's really going to make this card sing, I don't think. However, once we get to Brothers War, as well as the new Phyrexia set that's going to be coming out next year, I suspect there's going to be some crazy equipment. One mechanic that was real from the last time we went to New Phyrexia was Living Weapon. Batterskull is one of the best equipments that has been printed in recent memory. It is fantastic, and it slots into decks in Modern and I believe even Legacy right out the gate. That came from New Phyrexia. It is not impossible that a card similar to Batterskull, if not Batterskull itself, will be printed in the new Phyrexia set. I'm hopeful. Again, this is all speculation, but I'm hopeful we might see something like that. Because, well, it was an iconic card from that setting, and we're going back to that setting. If something like Batterskull or something like Colossus Hammer enters the arena in Standard, Astor becomes really good. But until a card like that enters the field, enters the fray, if you will, Astor is just going to be a janky build around. It's just not gonna quite get there, unfortunately. Cool card though, I like it, and it fits an archetype that I dig. All right, next up, we have Tolarian Terror. This is a 5/5 for 6 and a blue serpent, and I specifically wanted to touch on this because this is a card that has affinity without having affinity. And also, this is a common. I think that's relevant. So, Pauper players, be on the lookout for this thing. It says, this spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. And if you're like, wait a minute, isn't this Murktide Region at home? Like, well, not quite, but maybe almost. It also has Ward 2, just for good measure. So it's difficult to remove once it hits. It's just a big body. And in a Spellslinger style deck, this can actually be a really powerful finisher. You know, if you're hitting Considers, if you're hitting Play with Fires, if you're hitting Fading Hopes, well, all of which are still going to be standard legal, all of a sudden you can hit a Tolarian Terror for 2 or 3 very consistently. And putting a 5/5 on the board on turn 3 or 4 in a deck that is just full of spells and possibly things like Delver, I mean, all of a sudden, you might be looking at is it beatdown in Standard in a Spellslinger deck, which is kind of weird, and I like that. You know, it's a neat idea, and it's possible. And cards like this, and if there are other cards similar to this that, you know, care about instants and sorceries in our graveyard, we might be seeing payoffs that can do good things. So I think this card is neat, just in general. It's just cool. Also, we're seeing a serpent wrapped around what appears to be Tolarian Academy, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, cool visual, well done, neat stuff. That's actually, and the flavor text is great. Afterward, a number of treaties on sea serpent morphology were swiftly revised. That's kind of fun. Proper academic response to something like this. Anyway, next up we have Golden Argosy. And yes, it looked kind of like Agony when you first look at it, but no, it's Argosy. Exactly what an Argosy is, well, it appears to be some kind of boat. This is a legendary vehicle for 4, so maybe this is relevant with our Astor deck we were looking at, although it already has crew 1, so never mind. Whenever Golden Argosy attacks, exile each creature that crewed it this turn, returning them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So everyone out there who, when the last rotation hit and Yorion rotated out of Standard, if you were rejoicing, I'm sorry to tell you, it's kind of back. Except on top of that, this can recur more than just once. You know, with Yorion, it was dependent on entering the battlefield. This occurs every time it attacks. So obviously you don't get the benefit the first turn it comes down, but also it's a 3/6 for 4. So you're not putting a ton of power on the board, but being able to recur ETBs on blinks is by blinking your team is excellent. Also, combine this with Solkanar. All of a sudden being able to, this gives you an opportunity to blink Solkanar every single turn unless your opponent can kill a 3/6 in combat. And so you can pick, so if you are blinking Solkanar every single turn, you get to pick which mode of Solkanar you activate every single turn because you get a fresh one every turn. I think this is cool. I think this design is really neat. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it, and it's a 4-drop, which is kind of, like, it's a little expensive to be fair, but as far as vehicles go, like, this reminds me of Mysterious Limousine from Streets of New Capenna, except this is significantly better, if I'm honest. I think Golden Argosy is much better. This is the card I wanted Mysterious Limousine to be. Yeah, I dig it. I think this card is actually really cool. There are going to be ways to abuse this. I mean, even something as simple as a Spirited Companion, which is a card that we're going to continue to see all over. 1/1 for 2 when it ETBs, you draw a card. Golden Argosy, cruise for 1, you tap Spirited Companion. You attack with Golden Argosy, you blink out your Spirited Companion, it comes back into play untapped at your end step, and it's untapped. It's golden. Like, you're good to go. On top of that, you can also crew vehicles with other vehicles. So if you want to, like, reload your Reckoner Bankbuster, for example, you can crew the Reckoner Bankbuster and then use the Bankbuster to crew the Argosy. It's a little janky, it's a little weird, but there's play to be had here. And that's good design. I think good design is when the complexity of a card allows you to do interesting, cool things with it, and I see that here. So I'm liking it very much. The design on Dominaria so far has me just over the moon. I can't wait. All right, next up. We have Tyrannical Pitlord. When I first saw this, I was just seeing the name alone. I was like, "Ooh, are we doing some kind of Lord of the Pit variant?" Because that's something that we've seen before. Lord of the Pit is a classic card. I believe it was 7/7 for 7 that deals 7 damage to you on each turn unless you can sacrifice a creature, which is kind of like you need to feed it or it's going to get angry at you. Was a cool idea, but that's not what we have here. Anyway, Tyrannical Pitlord, 4 black for a 6/6 flying trample demon. So 6/6 for 6. Okay. As Tyrannical Pitlord enters the battlefield, choose another creature you control. The chosen creature gets +3/+3 and has flying. When Tyrannical Pitlord leaves the battlefield, sacrifice the chosen creature. So you're kind of soul bonding with that other creature. So again, if you're sitting with a 1/1, all of a sudden it becomes a 4/4 flyer. That's no joke. If you have, you know, some kind of Death Toucher, Trampler, I mean, you can combine this with some really cool effects. I mean, there are a lot of small creatures that have relevant keyword mechanics that all of a sudden get a +3/+3 bonus is a big deal, and I like that. And on top of that, you get a 6/6 Trampler for 6. I mean, in limited, this is a pack 1 pick 1 slam all day, no question. Like, but in constructed, I think it might still have some place. You know, a place on a curve topper for a black aggro deck as well. Maybe not aggro because 6-drop's a little heavy, but like a mid-range deck that's focusing on an aggressive game plan that's going to have creatures lying around, Tyrannical Pitlord could be a very powerful piece to that. I like this card. I think it's just good. And it's a demon. I like demons. Like, so demon tribal, hopefully it's a thing. Yeah, I dig it. I did Tyrannical Pitlord. It's just cool. I don't even know what else to say. I like this card a lot. All right. And lastly, there's one more card I want to talk about today. Now, keep an eye out for the channel for spoilers. If you haven't already clicked that subscribe button, please do, because we're going to be talking about a lot of cards as spoilers come out because it's exciting. New cards are always the thing. But the last card that I want to talk about today specifically is Shanna, Purifying Blade. This is a 3/3 lifelinker for green, white, blue. Legendary creature, human warrior. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, draw X cards. X can't be greater than the amount of life you gained this turn. So in a deck that is capable of incidentally gaining life, being able to dump excess mana at your end step into card draw is incredible. And I mean, the basic case here is you attack with Shanna, you gain 3 life off the lifelink, assuming Shanna survives. Like, obviously you don't attack into like a 5/5 or something, but if you have a good attack, you're able to gain the life off Shanna, is striking either the creature or the player or the planeswalker, and you gain the 3 life. At your end step, you put in 3 mana, and you draw 3 cards. 1 mana per card is a phenomenal rate. Like, if there was a spell, I mean, well, actually, we see it all the time. There are spells like, you know, Opt, for example. Granted, it's not just pay 1, draw a card, but it kind of is just pay 1, draw a card. You know, that's really what you're getting. I mean, yeah, you get the Scry, which is not nothing, but At the same time, a 1 mana draw card is absolutely worth it, and this is not, it's not consuming a card. Or actually, we see it with Cycling 1. Cycling 1 is incredibly powerful. And you know, this is so much better than that. It's so much better than that because you don't have to go down a card. So if you're gaining life, which is something you want to be doing anyway, you can just pump mana into this and just draw a lot of cards, potentially. You know, in Bant Angel lists that are gaining a ton of life right now, which granted, we're going to be losing Righteous Valkyrie, which, like, Shanna plus Righteous Valkyrie is insane. If you have anything that can produce a lot of mana, that would just draw your deck, which is incredible, because right now the life gain decks that are running around out there, they have life gain, they have power as a direct result of the life gain. The one thing that they're missing is card draw, and this 100% solves that. So I suspect, I'll be shocked if we don't see some kind of like Bant human list with a life gain sub theme that has Shanna in it. I'll be shocked. And on top of that, we have cards like Intrepid Adversary and Extraction Specialist, which are also life-linking humans. So I think a Bant human deck is very much very viable after this rotation. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be shocked if we don't see it. And I think Shanna is a slam dunk in there immediately. 3/3 human warrior for 3 with lifelink. That's exactly where you want to be. And again, we also have the pain lands now. So fixing 3 colors by turn 3 is not going to be terrible, assuming you craft the soul lands and the pain lands. Like, as long as you have and the triomes. I mean, as long as you have the duels, that's obviously going to be the thing. But this card is great. Yeah, this is what a mythic ought to be, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But that does it for this. It's been a long one. Thank you for bearing with me. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for being you, and thank you for checking it out. I appreciate it. Again, keep an eye on the channel for other upcoming videos. One of the things that I aspire to do with each spoiler season is try to find the most confusing card that is being previewed and do at least one video just explaining how the card works. I haven't quite found it yet. Braids might be that card, as could be... there were a couple we talked about today that maybe, but we'll see. But if you're curious what I'm talking about, my most popular video today has actually been an explanation of how Lagrella the Magpie works. If you're curious about that, definitely check that out. But one of the, I'm going to be doing something similar here. But these spoiler roundups are also going to be present on the channel. So thank you for checking this out. And there will be more to come. So yeah, this set's sweet. I just can't wait. So yeah, catch you on the next one, everybody.